Welcome to our business track with the Data Science Salon YouTube channel. This video focuses on how the functions of data, evidence, and science can share data-driven insights to elevate a marketing campaign. Bradley Deutsch, Data Science Director at Known, goes in depth with his examples.
Hey, Brad from Known here. Today I want to give a couple examples of how we use data to inform various parts of the marketing process and how we can gain additional advantages by linking together those parts. But first, many thanks to the Data Science Salon team for setting this up. I attended in the past, and it's a great program that I found really helpful, and I'm glad they found a way to keep it going despite the pandemic. So a little context on where I'm coming from. I'm a data science director at Known. We grew out of 3 companies. We have a data science consultancy called Shears & Associates, a brand strategy firm called Blackbird, and an advertising agency called Stun Creative with the creative studios. And we bring all of those areas of specialization to bear on marketing now. We help brands across media, tech, CPG, business-to-business, retail, and others. We've worked with HBO, Viacom, Microsoft, Google, Alibaba, Beyond Meat, many others, sometimes as an agency of record. Sometimes we come in for bespoke projects that are one piece of the marketing pipeline. And we call ourselves a modern marketing company, which means a lot of different things to us, and I encourage you to check out the website. But one piece of that is that we take an evidence-driven approach to everything we do. Some pieces of marketing are more amenable to data science than others, and I want to zoom in on those today by looking at some of the things we typically do to prepare for and run a single media campaign. Okay, so this slide just goes over a bird's eye view of all of our offerings across science and strategy and studios, but let's zoom in on just what a marketing campaign look at. So imagine for a moment you have a company, and personally, I'm a recovering academic, and when I was in grad school, I always figured that if I failed out, or when I failed out, I would buy a taco truck. And so my imaginary company sells tacos. And suppose you've already done the hard work of determining your belief system and your brand's voice and your brand's image, and you're ready to launch a new product, and it's accompanied by a promotional campaign. So for me, maybe that's a health-focused taco. And you want to make sure your campaign reaches the right people with the right message at the right time and has an amazing creative given your budget. These are 4 broad categories of things that you need to consider, and it's not an exhaustive list. But first, you need to understand who your audience is and how to reach them. So who's willing to try a health-focused taco? What are the different reasons people might have for trying one? Are they concerned about weight loss? They into clean living, organic food? Are they performance athletes? Maybe they're vegetarians and they're looking for a meat alternative. And then how much of the market does each of those segments represent? And then once you know who they are, how do you activate that audience? So how do you spend your budget in a smart way that puts ads in front of them efficiently? Second, we need to think about buying media. And for a digital campaign, that means bidding. So once you know where to reach your audience, you have to make sure you're getting the most high quality impressions for your money. So that includes choosing DSPs, choosing bidding strategies, but you're not going to be able to do this and steward your campaign through the entire flight unless you know how to expect auction prices to change over time and by site and by line item. So you need a way to predict that. So again, this is for a digital campaign, but the same ideas apply to TV or OTT or out of home. The idea is just generally that we need to use arbitrage to get a good deal on impressions for whatever our advanced segments are. Then we need to be able to tell that it's working or isn't. Attribution is really tricky. I know from the schedule, I haven't seen it yet, the talk yet, but there's at least one other talk today discussing the state of the art in attribution. Many times you'll be relying on vendors, and in any case, it's important to close the feedback loop and adjust your strategy if some campaigns are underperforming. So in other words, you need some degree of relatively real-time attribution to make adjustments. And then finally, there's the optimization itself. We can think of this as optimizing the creative and also the target line items and also the bids and the frequency and the timing, with the key being that we're trying to optimize for relevant KPIs, not just for the ones that are easy to measure. So maybe your brand is interested in cost per acquisition, for example, as opposed to a click-through rate, which would be really easy to measure. So for the rest of this talk, I'm going to cover how we think about audience segmentation and how we think about creative and bid optimization. And I'll touch on the pieces on this slide that are highlighted in pink because I think those are the most relevant for data scientists. So in a perfect world, we would know exactly which individuals in the market could be persuaded with exactly which messages and tactics, and then we could optimize our ROI directly. Practically speaking, though, it's helpful to think of the audience as being divided into fairly large groups that are similar to each other and different from other groups. And so marketers use audience segmentation, which identifies meaningful subgroups in the total addressable market. And that's not a new idea. That's a very old idea. But we can expand it now because the word meaningful here is doing a lot of heavy lifting. So putting on my data science hat, we need to cluster people together based on some sense of distance between them to account for the meaningful variance in the group. So we're essentially describing the market using a very simplified model that's easy to conceive of and talk about, but it's accurate enough that it lets us make good decisions. So what's meaningful? If I'm in the product, if I work in product, I want the model to capture the different ways people are using my product. So for example, I can prioritize features, I can find ways to bundle service, I can think about price sensitivity for different segments. If I'm on a creative team, I need my segmentation model to capture different attitudes so that I can shape the messages for each group. If I'm buying ads, I need to know how each group consumes media. So if you're in whatever segment, do I hit you on Facebook or do I go on linear TV? Do I advertise in Big Bang Theory? How do I actually reach you? And of course, the problem there is that we've overspecified the segments. So the Facebook segment is not necessarily the same people who use emojis on their phone. It's not the same people who are price insensitive. And so the limiting factor here is generally that the segmentation contains original research. It necessitates original research. So we need to sample the general population typically, and not just people who already use our product. And so we might have information on some people in our CRM, but we need a larger sample than that, or a more representative sample. We also need to know how they think about our products, how they think about competitive products, what are their use cases, what's their daily experience like. And because that research is typically slow and expensive, so at least it involves a fairly large survey, we really want to get this right the first time, and in a way that's usable throughout the entire organization, from product development to creative to advertising and beyond. So what makes a great segmentation? First, we need it to be statistically meaningful. And I have here get the modeling right, which is a little flippant, but it sounds vague. And essentially what it means is that the segments need to validate. So you need to find the same segments in the wild as the ones you found in your training data, and they need to be described by the same statistical distributions. Second, that it's strategically actionable, meaning that it feeds into your business objectives, and it's cast in a language that the team is used to. Remember that part of the reason that we're doing this segmentation is to help different actors across the org march all in the same direction. And so that requires socialization, and so it helps if you're carefully choosing these descriptions so that everyone's on board. Third, that it's seamlessly targetable, meaning that every time you describe a segment, you can also reach that segment specifically, efficiently, with the right messages. So the first thing that comes out of this process is what you've probably already seen a bunch of times if you're used to segmentations, where each segment is profiled in terms of behavior, preferences, demos. So on the left side here, we have how this segment, we're representing the segment with a person. We say, how does she use her time on the bus? Waiting for a seat to open, what she's listening to on Spotify, keeping an eye on the shady guy. These are like kind of cute things that obviously aren't describing everyone in the segment, but it's a way for the brand to look at that and identify with a person and say, okay, this is the kind of person we're talking about. And then in this specific case, we looked out, this happened to be for a transportation related company. And so we looked at the day in the life of this person and what her travels look like and all the things she does. Okay, so we have this idea, hopefully a really solid case for who is this person, giving us a handle to relate to that person. But how do we reach them? And so this is the part where the data science comes in a little bit more. By thinking ahead during the research process and connecting digital behaviors and location data to the segmentation, we end up with, first of all, a richer description of who this person is, but also a way to ensure that our segments are targetable. So for each survey respondent, for example, if we're doing a survey, we also collect their zip code or their MSA or their county or whatever, and they agree to have their digital behavior tracked for a short period of time. That means that once we have our segments, we actually know how often and when they're using Facebook and YouTube and Instagram, and whether they read news about college football or international politics or skip the news entirely. And then with the zip code data, we can zoom in on some city and figure out where to put out-of-home ads. Or these people in a place where they'll be commuting on a highway, in a subway, whatever else. But the idea here, the key point here, is that we don't have to settle for projecting the segments on these data. So, right, as an easy way to do this, I could just join in zip codes on my survey data, and you could just group by segment and say, these zip codes over index or under index. But since this is built into the research process, the online behaviors and location metrics can actually be included in the clustering. So we can choose to say, make sure my clusters within one cluster, there's not too much of a difference in online behavior or too much of a difference in location or latitude and longitude, so that once we've chosen our high priority segments, we can make a customized creative with an appropriate message and then reach those people extremely efficiently, whether it's targeting by interest on Facebook, whether it's putting a billboard in a certain location, whether it's targeting a particular show on TV. Once we're happy with our initial plan about who to target, and we produced our creatives and we settled on a media budget, we need to make sure that we're getting the best ROI possible still. And that means that we have to optimize as we go. So the way I think of this is that as a company, you want to optimize your ROI, which is like trying to climb the highest mountain. You're trying to find the highest peak in the mountain range where you're doing the best. Everything in the marketing pipeline up to this point gets you to the right mountain. And now you need to actually climb it. So this is a place for all you data scientists, this is a place where clearly experimentation is going to win the day. So in the simplest case, you have two strategies, which might be two different line items, or it might be two different creatives, or it might be two different pieces of copy, or it might be two different times a day. And we run those two strategies for a while, and we look at which one performs better, and then we put more money into the better performing one. So that's just a randomized controlled trial, and that is the foundation of the scientific method. It's frankly why they call us data scientists instead of data analysts. So here's a rough sketch of what that process would look like. We start with, and I don't know if you can see my mouse for sure, but I hope so. We start with an initial allocation across campaigns, and here they're labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, N, but in reality there could be hundreds of them running simultaneously. And each one of those is some combination of a target and a creative and a time of day and so forth. So we run those for a bit, and we collect metrics for each campaign. So some of those are pretty easy things to measure, like impressions or click-through rate. Sometimes they'll also include KPIs that the brand is interested that are not so easy to measure. So for example, one of our clients wants people to sign up for a paid service. And so we need to track not only who's clicking through the ad, but who eventually does sign up for the service. What was the cost per acquisition? And so if you want to measure that and feedback on it in any reasonable amount of time, you have to build their first-party data about acquisitions and leads into the back end that's adjusting these in real time. And so some of the work we do is in that integration. But given those results, whatever's coming out of those KPIs in real time or close to real time, we make small adjustments on those campaigns and redistribute the money. So we do some straightforward A/B testing to see, it's a little microscope down there, to see which line items are created are performing best. And we also look at how the campaign is pacing. So how fast are we running through the budget? And we make corrections using machine learning predictions. Here we'd have a model that predicts impressions on this particular place per hour, predictions based on spend, which is a little bit tricky, right? Because often you will only spend money when someone clicks through, which means you have a very biased sample. So you're only seeing successful bids and you have to correct for that. And then we end up making adjustments to the initial allocation, emphasizing some micro campaigns above other ones. And then this cycle just gets repeated over the full flight over and over and over again. We've found that the best way to do this, the best practice here, is to have what we call buyer scientists looking over the campaign. There are a few reasons we ended up with that as a best practice. The first one is that every campaign is different. There are really no push button campaigns. There are different business contexts. There are different KPIs. The clients have different kinds of information available. They have their own internal reporting to do, which is going to be different. And we need to be able to customize where necessary on a fairly short turnaround often. Second is, especially for very large clients, news items and world events can change things significantly in a way that may require some intervention that's not obvious, or even flagging things for the client that may need to be changed. And then finally, we need to be able to communicate back upstream about what's working and what's not, so that whenever there are inefficiencies, they don't get repeated over and over again, even in following campaigns. So we need to be able to look at experimental results and notice statistically significant patterns that are meaningful to the business and then communicate them, which is essentially the job description of a data scientist or an analyst. And on top of that, this is really only part of the process. So this dives in a little bit to what to a little more of where data science comes to bear on this. So the data science aspect of campaign optimization includes the creative optimization I was talking about, but also reaches beyond that. So there's NLP for search keywords, so search engine optimization. We can often integrate CRM data using probabilistic lookalike matching to get additional info on the customers beyond the market research. So make sure we're integrating any first-party data that people have, what features they may be using, things like that. And then there's the bid optimization itself, which frankly could be a whole talk unto itself. But the basic idea is we need to balance running a performant campaign with exploring the space sufficiently and probing the auction ecosystem to make sure we're getting the best deals and not overbidding and not underbidding. So to get an idea of what goes on in this optimization loop, this is what a 5-minute snapshot might look like. So there are around 10,000 bid adjustments, which are controlled by a pacing algorithm. And that makes sure that the campaign's spending at the right rate by adjusting to the current market. There are a couple hundred budget adjustments, meaning that each sub-campaign gets reweighted to adjust to the market fluctuations, and also according to how the KPIs are changing over time, right? We may see some performance on Monday and Tuesday that turns out not to be true on Saturday and Sunday, and we need to adjust based on that. A few thousand, 3,000 plus campaign pauses and activations. So if you're running in a channel in the time of day that turns out to underperform, there's really no reason to run that. And so you can just shut it off or turn another one back on. And 400 plus creative pauses and activations, which is similar to what DCO, Dynamic Creative Optimization, does, where we seek out the creatives that are most likely to be performant. So all up, this system, this optimization loop, has the potential to significantly increase ROI by whatever definition you're looking at. I mentioned we have a client who wants to acquire users for a paid service. And we saw that when we benchmark against just maintaining initial allocations like they had been doing, then running this feedback loop decreased cost per acquisition by 65%, which is really significant, right? For the same spend, they get 3 times the acquisition. So beyond standalone optimization, it's important to note that a lot of the value here isn't just from finding those line items that are working and reallocating. It's by connecting to the other parts of the marketing process. So the segmentation was built with targeting in mind. So in essence, our strategic idea of audience segments about who they are and how we can think about them in the org when it comes to products, for example, and creative, and our tactical idea of audience segments, so how do we actually reach those people and convert them, was expressed in the same language. So from an information theory perspective, we're thinking about how to project one idea of the segments onto another idea of the segments minimally, while losing minimal information. Creative production was also informed by the segmentation in terms of what messages need to be included, but also by the optimization strategy. So by the time we get to buying media, we likely have all of the key art and copy we need, and then the Cartesian product of all that stuff most likely has a good optimum inside. And by the way, the fact that there's a buyer scientist looking at these results who's routinely in contact with the creative team means that if we catch any interesting patterns or we can come up with new ideas for new creative key art that's not in our original set and either include it in this round or the next round. Excuse me. Finally, as we gather more data, we're not really locked into these original audience segments. Remember that the segmentation was mostly a communication tool. It helps us conceptualize the audience and makes it easier when it comes to activation, but we're all but guaranteed to find pockets of behavior in the population that are based on new things that are coming, for example, from the auctions, information that's attached to IP address or third-party cookies, which are dying but are not dead yet. That given that information, we can see new tiny segments that are performing really well, which might be a surprise. They turn out to be really high on ROI. And so those lessons can get fed back upstream, and we can make adjustments to how the brand thinks about their customer. So thanks for your attention. Thanks again to the organizers. I hope that even though I only touched on a few parts of the marketing process, this gives you a look at different ways that data and evidence can increase marketing ROI. And I really wanted to underscore the importance of feeding information in both directions to improve performance over time. So hopefully I'll see you all next year in person. See you next time.
That was a presentation by Bradley Deutsch, Data Science Director at Known, who provided his expertise on data-derived insights and how they can optimize marketing campaigns and strategies. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe to our channel below.